with 40 in them. I've written over 40 books. I'm translated in over 40 countries, and I'm over 40 years old, and I'm just leaving it at that. No need to go into details. So, I'm going to read from The Heart Goes Last, which I began writing as a serial on the internet. So it was my exploration of writing a serial novel the way Charles Dickens used to do, but he was, I'm afraid, much better at it than I was, and he would just write the pages and hand them to the printer's devil, which was a young boy who would run from Charles Dickens writing it over to the place where they typeset it, and it would just immediately go out. So he didn't have an editor or spell check or anything, and he was writing with a quill pen. And believe it or not, I have written with that exact same quill pen. I have written with Charles Dickens's quill pen at the Royal Society for Literature in London, England. I had to practice first, so I wouldn't make a great big blot, because what I was writing in was a book in which all of these other writers, stretching back 200 years, had also written their names. Just think what would have happened if I'd messed up. Yeah, so I really admired what he was doing, because it wasn't so easy, even for me. And think of that, with the quill pen, immediately out the door. So I wrote 4 installments of this book, which didn't have a name yet. And after the 4th one, my publisher noticed what I was doing and got agitated and said, "Margaret, what are you doing? You ought to be writing books with covers and pages." So I turned it into a book with covers and pages, and that took some unknitting of parts of it and some rearrangement of parts, and I had to make a beginning for it, and then I had to make an end for it, because when I left off with installment 4, our hero Stan was disguised as an Elvis sex robot and being shipped off to Las Vegas in a packing crate, and that was the end of the episode. So of course we were all wondering what happened at the other end when he got to Las Vegas and somebody opened the crate. So I had to continue on with that. Like Charles Dickens, I ended each episode with a cliffhanger, and that was my cliffhanger for episode 4. It was also an Elvis outfit that didn't quite fit. It was a bit too small. I'm afraid I gave Stan many challenges to overcome in this book and many quests to fulfill. Yes. So it has 2 central characters. Their names are Stan and Charmaine. You can see them on the cover. And when they sent me the prototype for the cover, neither of them were smiling. So I gave them some advice. I said, you've got to make Charmaine smiling, but Stan not smiling. And that's kind of the way it is. So now Charmaine is smiling. The other thing I told them, and this is between you and me, is that the first cover that they sent me, at the top of the M, right there was a mysterious dark spot. It said, you need to get rid of the mysterious dark spot because it looks as if Stan has wet himself. The internet is not a kind place. The land of magic, it will not be kind about that. It will make jokes about it. And they said, oh, we didn't see that. And I thought, why not? We're visual designers. So excited about putting the two O's together that they didn't see the round spot. So this is the kind of thing that constantly occupies my mind. This book has got 3 epigraphs at the front. They're like the key signatures to a book. And these are the 3 in this book. The first one is from, it's very respectable. The first one is very respectable because it's from classical mythology. And everything in classical mythology is very respectable. Even though the things that are very weird and kinky, they're very respectable nonetheless, because they're in Greek, right? Latin. So it's from the story of Pygmalion and Galatea in Ovid, and that's the one in which Pygmalion is a sculptor, and he sculpts a beautiful ivory woman and then falls in love with her and goes to bed with her, in fact, and sleeps with her. It's respectable. It's in Latin. And then the goddess of love takes pity on him and turns her into a real woman. So it's sort of like Pinocchio, only with sex. And that ends happily. The third one is a quote from Midsummer Night's Dream. It's also very respectable, though when you actually see it and think about it a bit, it's very dark. It is a romantic comedy, but it's a very dark romantic comedy about 4 people who get confused in the woods at night, and one girl wakes up to find out that the man that she thought madly adored her now can't stand the sight of her. So for the people in that romantic comedy, it's not a comedy, it's a nightmare. And comedy is often like that. It's funny for us watching, but for them, it's really pretty horrible. And so it is for Stan and Charmaine. And the middle one is from the internet, a wondrous place, and it's from a web posting called I Had Sex with Furniture. It is about a man who has sex with furniture, and he says, I'm doing this so that you don't have to. Some American entrepreneur, and they are endlessly entrepreneurial, thought it would be a good idea to invent and market a sofa which had a sex aperture in it. Why did they think that was a good idea? Don't they know that most sofas in the world are purchased by women? What woman would want that in her living room? There is a museum in America called the Museum of Failed Inventions, and I think this sofa is probably already in the Museum of Failed Inventions. But you can go on the web and read the entire web posting. I just give a little extract from it. So that is the range of this book, everywhere from very respectable to I had sex with furniture. And there are 2 different aesthetic theories, English and French. And I think they come from the fact that drama in France was developed for the court, and it was always pretty tasteful, and they felt that you should respect the unities and all sorts of other classical ideas, whereas Shakespeare was writing for a very mixed audience. So some aristocrats and some people who wanted drinking jokes and basically poo-poo jokes and all sorts of other things like that. So he always mixes them up. And that is the English tradition that we have basically inherited. And so did Kurt Vonnegut inherit it as well. Someone told me recently, hey, this reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut, and I'm not sad about that. So I'm going to read you a little bit from the beginning of the book, and in the beginning of the book, there has been a 2008-like financial meltdown, and the young couple, Stan and Charmaine, who had started out pretty well, they each had a job, they got a house, they got a mortgage, and then this thing happened, and their enterprises closed down, they didn't have jobs anymore, they couldn't get other jobs, and pretty soon they couldn't pay their mortgage, and pretty soon they were living in their car. And we may think this is the future, but it's actually the past and the present. There are a lot of people who are living in their cars right now, not even necessarily because they got kicked out of their house, but because things in big cities have become too expensive for young people to live in them. I was just in London, England recently, and there was a whole radio show devoted to parents whose kids had moved back into their houses, plus and minus. And some of the people phoning in were the kids who had moved back in. So I'm hearing a lot of stories like this. Anyway, this is Stan and Charmaine in their car. And not only are they living in their car, but they're living in their car in an area where there is no more social network and security force. So it's dangerous to live in your car. This is Charmaine. Sleeping in the car is cramped. Being a third-hand Honda, it's no palace to begin with. If it was a van, they'd have more room, but fat chance of affording one of those, even back when they thought they had money. Stan says they're lucky to have any kind of a car at all, which is true, but their luckiness doesn't make the car any bigger. Charmaine feels that Stan ought to sleep in the back because he needs more space. It would only be fair, he's larger, but he has to be in the front in order to drive them away fast in an emergency. He doesn't trust Charmaine's ability to function under those circumstances. He says she'd be too busy screaming to drive. So Charmaine can have the more spacious back, even though even so she has to curl up like a snail because she can't exactly stretch out. They keep the windows mostly closed because of the mosquitoes and the gangs and the solitary vandals. The solitaries don't usually have guns or knives. If they have those kinds of weapons, you have to get out of there triple fast. But they're more likely to be batshit crazy, and a crazy person with a piece of metal or a rock or even a high-heeled shoe can do a lot of damage. They'll think you're a demon or the undead or a vampire whore, and no kind of reasonable thing you might do to calm them down will cancel out that opinion. The best thing with crazy people, Grandma Wynne used to say, the only thing really, is to be somewhere else. With the windows shut, except for a crack at the top, the air gets dead and supersaturated with their own smells. There aren't many places where they can grab a shower or wash their clothes, and that makes Stan irritable. It makes Charmaine irritable too, but she tries her best to stamp on that feeling and look on the bright side, because what's the use of complaining? What's the use of anything, she often thinks, but what's the use of even thinking, what's the use? So instead she says, honey, let's just cheer up. Why, Stan says. Stan twists in the front seat, trying to get comfortable. Not much fucking chance of that. So what can he do? Where can they turn? There's no safe place. There are no instructions. It's like he's being blown by a vicious but mindless wind, aimlessly round and round in circles. No way out. He feels so lonely, and sometimes having Charmaine with him makes him feel lonelier. He's let her down. He has a brother, true, but that would be a last resort. He and Connor had followed different paths, was the polite way of saying it. A drunken midnight fight with dickheads and douchebags and shit for brains freely exchanged would be the impolite way of saying it. And it was in fact the way Connor had chosen during their last encounter. To be accurate, Stan had chosen that way too, though he'd never had as foul a mouth as Con. In Stan's view, his view at that time, Connor was next door to a criminal. But in Con's view, Stan was a dupe of the system, an ass-kisser, a farce, and a coward. Balls of a tadpole. Where's Slippery Connor now? What's he doing? At least he won't have lost his job in the big financial crash business-wrecking meltdown that turned this part of the country into a rust bucket. You can't lose your job if you don't have one. Unlike Stan, he hadn't been expelled, cast out, condemned to a life of frantic, grit in the eyes, rancid armpit wandering. Con had always lived off what he could mooch or filch from others ever since he was a kid. Stan hasn't forgotten his Swiss Army knife that he'd saved up for, his transformer, his Nerf gun with the foam bullets. Magical disappearances all, with Con's younger brother head going shake, shake, shake from side to side. No way, who, me? Stan wakes at night thinking for a moment he's home in bed, or at least in a bed of some sort. He reaches for Charmaine, but she isn't there beside him, and he finds himself inside the stinking car, needing a piss but afraid to unlock the door because of the voices yammering towards him, and the footsteps crunching on gravel or thudding on asphalt. And then Charmaine's terrified little whisper, "Stan, Stan, we need to go. We need to go right now." As if he couldn't figure that out for himself.